What land animals and sea creatures would be considered clean and unclean under the law of Moses? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Deuteronomy on Walking Through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Deuteronomy chapter 14. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 10. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Deuteronomy chapter 14, beginning of verse 1. You are the children of the Lord your God. You shall not cut yourselves nor shave the front of your head for the dead. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God, and the Lord has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all peoples who are on the face of the earth. You shall not eat any detestable thing. These are the animals which you may eat: the ox, the sheep, the goat, the deer, the gazelle, the roe deer, the wild goat, the mountain goat, the antelope, and the mountain sheep. And you may eat every animal with cloven hooves, having the hoof split into two parts, and that chews the cud among the animals. Nevertheless, of those that chew the cud or have cloven hooves, you shall not eat, such as these: the camel, the hare, and the rock hyrax. For they chew the cud, but do not have cloven hooves. They are unclean for you. Also the swine is unclean for you, because it has cloven hooves, yet does not chew the cud. You shall not eat their flesh or touch their dead carcasses. These you may eat of all that are in the waters. You may eat all that have fins and scales. And whatever does not have fins and scales you shall not eat. It is unclean for you. In the last chapter, Moses was explaining to Israel what they were going to do to those who enticed them to go after idols. They were to put them to death. And if a whole town went after idols, then the whole town was to be killed and the city burned to the ground. This is how abominable idolatry was to God. It was to be rooted out and completely destroyed. In chapter 14, we leave the topic of idolatry, which we have been covering extensively for these last many chapters, and move on to other topics. The next topic has to do with markings on their body for the dead, tattoos, or shaving the front of their head, meaning between their eyes for the dead. This is what the idolatrous nations round about Israel did on the occasion of death, and God didn't want Israel practicing such things, for they were a holy people to God, and they were to act holy. Christians today wonder if God cares if they have tattoos. I cannot turn to this passage to condemn such, because this is not our law today. However, I always tell Christians to look into the New Testament for authority. Can you find passages that would permit tattoos? Yes, there are no passages that condemn them like the law of Moses did here, but can you find passages that permit such? We're to do all things to the glory of the Lord, which is why in good conscience I cannot get a tattoo. We have so many other ways to express ourselves rather than marking up our bodies, ways that we know God approves of. So why don't we stick to those and leave the tattoos of this world behind, for we, like Israel, are to be a holy people. Another thing that would distinguish the nation of Israel from the nations round about them was their diet. By and large, the other nations ate whatever food they wished, and also ate blood, something else God condemned, in worship to their gods. For Israel, though, there would be some meats that were clean, and some meats that were unclean, and how this determination was made depended on what type of animal it was. We first saw these regulations in Leviticus chapter 11, a chapter that you can read on your own time. Now we must make note that the description of these animals as clean or unclean does not have anything to do with the animal's hygiene or suitability for food, for there is no such distinction given under the law of Christ, but solely based on God's choice for his people under this law. What we found in Leviticus was that the food was divided into 5 classifications: animals, meaning land animals, fish, birds, insects, and creeping things, while in Deuteronomy there are only 4, with insects and creeping things being combined into one classification. Of the land animals, there would be 2 distinguishing features, both of which an animal must have had in order to be considered clean. It must chew the cud, and it must divide the hoof. Chewing the cud is when an animal regurgitates its food and rechews it as part of the digestive process, while a divided hoof or cloven hoof is a hoof that is split into 2 toes. If it didn't have either of those features, then it was unclean, and if it only had one of these features, it was unclean. Now with some animals, it would be easy to determine if it was unclean. Well, with other animals, it might be more difficult, so God gave some examples as a means of clarification. Some examples of clean animals which could be eaten are the ox, the sheep, the goat, the deer, the gazelle, the roe deer, the wild goat, the mountain goat, the antelope, and the mountain sheep. Examples of animals that the Hebrews could not eat are the camel, the hare, and the rock hyrax, for they chew the cud, but do not have cloven hooves, and swine, because it has cloven hooves, yet does not chew the cud. When it came to unclean animals, they were not to eat the flesh, nor touch the dead carcass, lest they be unclean. Some of these animals, like the camel, could be used as beasts of burden, but if an unclean animal couldn't be used for that, then generally the Hebrews shouldn't have been raising them. After land animals, Moses turned his attention to fish or other things that swim in the water. The characteristic that was important here was the fins and scales. For a sea animal to be clean, it must have fins and scales. If it did not have both, it was unclean and must not be eaten, nor their dead bodies touched. From Leviticus, we got a sampling of seafood that would be considered clean, and that would be bass, flounder, haddock, halibut, pollock, and tuna, while seafood that was unclean would be catfish, crab, eel, mussels, oysters, lobsters, shrimp, swordfish, and whales. Moses will continue with these dietary laws as we continue with this chapter, which we will do, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 11 to 21, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.